At 0645 hours on the 23rd of August 1942, the sky above the industrial city of Stalingrad erupts in flames. 600 German Luftwaffe bombers, the largest aerial bombardment concentration in history to that point, unleash over 1,000 tons of high explosives and incendiaries onto a city of 400,000 civilians. Within 36 hours, approximately 40,000 civilians lie dead in the streets and burning rubble. The Volga River itself appears to burn as oil storage facilities explode, sending sheets of flame across the water's surface. Yet this apocalyptic destruction represents merely the opening act of what will become the deadliest battle in human history. Over the next 5 months and 13 days, more than 2 million soldiers and civilians will become casualties in a struggle that transforms the city into what German soldiers call *Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. Among the ruins of apartment buildings and factory floors, a single 4-story structure defended by fewer than 30 Soviet soldiers will inflict more casualties than the German conquest of France. This is not a story of nations at war. This is the story of the Battle of Stalingrad, told through the mathematics of destruction, the logistics of survival, and the strategic miscalculations that transformed Adolf Hitler's greatest offensive into Nazi Germany's first catastrophic defeat. To understand why Stalingrad matters, we must first understand what it represented in the summer of 1942, when German forces launched Operation Barbarossa on the 22nd of June, 1941, deploying 3 million men across an 1,800-mile front. Adolf Hitler expected the Soviet Union to collapse within 8 to 10 weeks. The operation began with stunning success. By December 1941, Wehrmacht forces had captured 3 million Soviet prisoners, destroyed over 20,000 Soviet tanks, and advanced to within sight of Moscow's Kremlin towers. Yet the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, it absorbed catastrophic losses and continued fighting. By April 1942, Hitler recognized that Germany lacked the military capacity to sustain simultaneous offensive operations across the entire Eastern Front. He needed a focused objective one with strategic, economic, and psychological value. He chose the South. Operation Blue, launched in June 1942, aimed to capture the Caucasus oil fields near Baku, which provided approximately 80% of Soviet petroleum resources. Control of these fields would simultaneously fuel Germany's war machine while crippling Soviet mobility. The city of Stalingrad occupied a critical position in this campaign. Situated on the western bank of the Volga River, it served as the Soviet Union's primary north-south transportation artery. The city produced 1/4 of Soviet tank and artillery production. Its 3 massive industrial complexes, the Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, the Barakati gun foundry, and the Red October Steel Works manufactured T-34 tanks that rolled directly from assembly lines into combat positions within the city streets. More importantly, Stalingrad represented the gateway to the Caucasus. German control of the city would sever Soviet supply lines, protect the northern flank of Army Group A, advancing toward the oil fields, and deliver a psychological blow to Soviet morale by capturing the city bearing Stalin's name. For both Hitler and Stalin, Stalingrad transformed from a tactical objective into an obsession. Neither dictator would permit retreat. What began as a strategic operation devolved into what military historians call a prestige battle, a contest where political symbolism overruled military logic. By August 1942, German Sixth Army, under General Paulus, comprising approximately 300,000 men, supported by elements of 4th Panzer Army, approached Stalingrad's outskirts. To their north and south, Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian armies held extended defensive positions along the Don River bend, protecting the German flanks. This deployment pattern would prove catastrophic. But in August 1942, German confidence remained absolute. The German assault on Stalingrad city proper begins on the 23rd of August 1942, With the massive Luftwaffe bombardment, it reduces much of the city to rubble within 48 hours. Paradoxically, this destruction aids the Soviet defenders. The skeletal remains of apartment blocks, the twisted steel of collapsed factories, and the mountains of brick and concrete debris create a three-dimensional battlefield that nullifies German advantages in armor, artillery, and air power. On the 12th of September 1942, General Vasily Zhukov assumes command of the Soviet 62nd Army, the principal defensive force within Stalingrad city. Zhukov, a 52-year-old combat veteran with a reputation for brutal tactical realism, faces an impossible situation. His 55,000 troops control a narrow strip of urban terrain, nowhere more than 2 miles deep, pressed against the Volga River. German forces outnumber him. German artillery pounds his positions constantly. Soviet reinforcements must cross the Volga under German observation and artillery fire. Casualties during river crossings often exceed 50% before units even reach combat positions. Zhukov develops a revolutionary defensive doctrine that transforms urban warfare. He calls it hugging the enemy, positioning Soviet troops within 50 meters of German front lines. This proximity renders German artillery and air support useless. Luftwaffe bombs and Wehrmacht shells kill Germans and Soviets indiscriminately at close range. Zhukov organizes his forces into small assault groups of 6 to 8 men, a rifle squad equipped with machine guns, grenades, and explosives. These Sturmovik groups infiltrate buildings, occupy cellars, fortify rooms, and transform every structure into a miniature fortress. The fighting takes on characteristics unlike any previous military engagement. Soldiers battle floor by floor within buildings, sometimes controlling different levels of the same structure simultaneously. Combat occurs in stairwells, basements, sewers, and crawl spaces. German soldiers, accustomed to open-field blitzkrieg tactics, find themselves engaged in what they bitterly call Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. A German lance corporal writes home, "We fight over a single wall, for a single house, for a single pile of rubble. We take a kitchen in the morning, fight for the bedroom until evening, and spend the night dying in the cellar. Distance no longer measures in kilometers, but in meters." A Soviet report from October 1942 notes, "The distance between our forces and the enemy is as small as the throw of a grenade. We have fought for a single street for 3 weeks. We fight for every square yard, sometimes for a single square yard, and we cover it with German corpses. The sewers beneath Stalingrad become labyrinths of combat. Soviet and German patrols encounter each other in pitch darkness, fighting with knives, bayonets, and improvised clubs in spaces too confined for rifles. The urban battlefield creates its own terrible arithmetic. In conventional warfare, attackers historically require a 3-to-1 numerical advantage for successful assault. In Stalingrad's ruins, attackers need 10-to-1 advantages. A single Soviet machine gun position, properly positioned in rubble, can hold an intersection for days against battalion-strength assaults. The Germans commit more troops. Casualties escalate. Progress measures in buildings captured per week. Yet the city does not fall. By early October 1942, the battle focuses on Stalingrad's northern industrial district, a 5-kilometer stretch of massive factory complexes along the Volga's western bank. The Dzerzhinsky tractor factory, covering 2 square kilometers, becomes the scene of some of the most intense fighting in military history. German 14th Panzer Division and 305th Infantry Division launch coordinated assaults on the 14th of October 1942. 20,000 German troops, supported by 90 tanks and overwhelming artillery, attack Soviet 37th Guards Rifle Division, which numbers fewer than 2,500 combat-effective soldiers. The factory's massive workshops, foundries, and assembly halls transform into killing grounds. Soviet defenders position themselves in elevated positions, in crane operator cabins, on overhead gantries, inside ventilation systems. They ambush German assault troops from above and behind. Fighting continues through assembly lines, where partially completed T-34 tanks serve as improvised fortifications. Some Soviet tanks, lacking fuel or crews, are manned by factory workers who fire stationary guns at advancing Germans. After 4 days of continuous combat, German forces capture approximately 60% of the tractor factory. The cost: over 3,000 German casualties. Soviet 37th Guards Division is effectively destroyed. Only 320 soldiers remain combat capable. Yet the survivors continue fighting from the factory's ruins, transforming collapsed buildings into strongpoints that require additional German assaults to eliminate. South of the tractor factory stands the Barricade gun foundry, where Soviet 138th Rifle Division conducts its defense. The foundry's massive structures, some with walls 3 meters thick, resist German artillery. Combat occurs in labyrinthine passages between enormous foundry furnaces, through underground steam tunnels, and across open-air smelting yards where molten metal residue remains. German attack reports document the surreal horror: soldiers advancing through spaces illuminated by still-glowing furnace embers, fighting over catwalks suspended above industrial pits, clearing rooms filled with half-finished artillery pieces that provide improvised barricades. The Red October Steelworks, the largest of the 3 factory complexes, becomes the site of the battle's most brutal combat. The facility's multiple factory halls, each the size of an aircraft hangar, fragment into micro-battlefields. Soviet soldiers occupy fortified positions in factory offices, inside massive industrial machinery, beneath conveyor systems. German 79th Infantry Division reports capturing the same workshop 5 separate times, each capture followed by Soviet counterattacks that retake the position. One German company commander documents capturing a single factory hall over 11 consecutive days, describing it as a building that reproduces itself each night. These factory battles produce casualty rates exceeding previous military engagement records. German divisions, nominally numbering 12,000 to 15,000 men, arrive at full strength and disintegrate to 2,000 to 3,000 combat effectives within 3 weeks. Soviet rifle divisions, already under strength at 6,000 to 8,000 men upon deployment, often cease to exist as functioning units within 1 week. The Soviet command compensates through constant reinforcement across the Volga, small boats and barges, delivering fresh troops into the inferno every night. German intelligence estimates that Soviet 62nd Army requires 3,000 to 5,000 replacements weekly just to maintain static force levels. The mathematics of attrition favor neither side. Germany cannot replace casualties faster than they accumulate. The Soviet Union possesses greater manpower reserves, but faces logistical constraints. Crossing the Volga, the battle transforms into a mutual bleeding, a contest to determine which side's will breaks first. Amidst the industrial carnage, one building achieves legendary status through perfect intersection of tactical advantage and human determination. On the 27th of September 1942, Sergeant Yakov Pavlov leads a 4-man reconnaissance patrol into a 4-story apartment building overlooking Stalingrad's central the 9th of January square. The building occupies a dominant tactical position. It provides observation over approaches from 3 directions, covers a critical road intersection, and stands only 300 meters from the Volga riverbank, thus defending a key Soviet supply route. Pavlov's initial patrol discovers approximately 40 civilians, mostly women and children, sheltering in the building's basement. Rather than evacuating them across the Volga, which would expose them to German fire, Pavlov keeps them in the basement and reinforces the building's defenses. Over the next 3 days, Soviet command sends additional troops. Lieutenant Ivan Afanasyev arrives with a machine gun platoon, 4 anti-tank rifle teams, and a group of combat engineers. Total defensive force, 26 soldiers. They transform the apartment building into a fortress. Engineers dig a communication trench connecting Pavlov's house to Soviet lines 40 meters away, permitting reinforcement and resupply under cover. Soldiers knock holes through interior walls, creating covered movement routes between rooms. Anti-tank rifles position in ground floor windows, covering the square. Machine guns in place in upper floor apartments with overlapping fields of fire. Snipers occupy attic positions. The basement becomes ammunition storage, command post, and civilian shelter. German forces recognize the building's tactical significance and launch repeated assaults to capture it. Over 58 consecutive days, from the 27th of September to the 25th of November 1942, German infantry and tank units attack Pavlov's house approximately once every 2 days. Each assault follows similar patterns. Artillery bombardment, followed by infantry advance under covering fire, sometimes supported by tanks attempting to reduce the building with point-blank cannon fire. The defenders develop sophisticated defensive protocols. When German attacks begin, sniper teams engage officers and NCOs first, disrupting German command and control. As German infantry crosses the square, machine gunners fire interlocking bursts that create kill zones where Germans cannot advance or retreat without exposure. Anti-tank rifle teams firing 14.5 millimeters PTRD rifles, capable of penetrating 40 millimeters of armor-destroyed German tanks at ranges under 100 meters. When Germans penetrate the building's ground floor, defenders drop grenades down stairwells and fire through holes in floors, forcing Germans to fight upward through prepared positions. Soviet propaganda transforms Pavlov's house into a symbol of resistance. A military journalist reports, "The Germans lost more men trying to take Pavlov's house than they lost capturing Paris." While this specific comparison lacks documentary evidence, casualty analyses suggest German forces suffered approximately 300 to 500 casualties in attacks on this single building, more men than many regiment-strength assaults cost in other theaters. The building's significance extends beyond propaganda. Pavlov's house exemplifies the tactical principles that make Stalingrad a German nightmare: prepared defensive positions, small unit cohesion, effective use of terrain, and absolute determination. Every building in Stalingrad becomes a potential Pavlov's house. German forces must capture each one individually at cumulative cost that exceeds Germany's capacity to sustain. While German forces grind forward in Stalingrad's ruins, Soviet Stavka, the High Command, plans Germany's destruction. In mid-September 1942, General Georgy Zhukov, Deputy Supreme Commander of Soviet forces, presents Stalin with a strategic assessment. German forces concentrated in Stalingrad create operational vulnerability. German 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army occupy a narrow salient extending deep into Soviet territory. Their flanks, stretching over 400 kilometers north and south of Stalingrad, are defended by Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian armies. Intelligence reports indicate these allied forces possess inferior equipment, inadequate anti-tank weapons, and low morale. Zhukov proposes a double envelopment operation, simultaneous attacks against both German flanks designed to encircle and destroy all Axis forces in the Stalingrad region. Stalin approves the operation, codenamed Uranus, on the 13th of September 1942. Preparation requires extraordinary secrecy and logistical precision. Over 2 months, Soviet forces transport approximately 1 million fresh troops, 14,000 heavy guns, 1,000 tanks, and sufficient ammunition for sustained offensive operations to attack positions north and south of Stalingrad. All movement occurs at night. Radio silence is absolute. Deception operations convince German intelligence that Soviet forces are exhausted, incapable of major offensive action. German intelligence fails catastrophically. Foreign Armies East Wehrmacht Intelligence Organization monitoring. Soviet forces estimates. Soviet strategic reserves at 1.5 million men. Actual Soviet reserves exceed 6 million. German reconnaissance identifies some Soviet buildup, but underestimates its scale by approximately 60%. German 6th Army commander, General Friedrich Paulus, receives multiple warnings from Romanian commanders about increasing Soviet activity north of Stalingrad. Paulus dismisses these concerns, focused entirely on capturing the remaining Soviet positions within the city. At 0730 hours on the 19th of November 1942, Soviet artillery, over 3,500 guns, opened simultaneous fire against Romanian Third Army positions north of Stalingrad. The bombardment lasts 80 minutes. Soviet historical accounts describe the effect. The earth appeared to move as if in an earthquake. In some Romanian positions, entire companies died without firing a shot, buried in their bunkers by collapsing earthworks. Following the artillery preparation, Soviet 5th Tank Army, approximately 900 tanks and 330,000 troops, attacks Romanian positions. Romanian units, equipped primarily with World War I-era artillery and virtually no effective anti-tank weapons, collapse within hours. By evening on the 19th of November, Soviet armored spearheads advanced 30 kilometers, penetrating deep into the German rear. Romanian Third Army effectively ceases to exist as a coherent force, suffering approximately 75,000 casualties and losing most of its heavy equipment in the first 24 hours. On the 20th of November 1942, a second Soviet offensive strikes Romanian Fourth Army south of Stalingrad. The pattern repeats. Overwhelming artillery bombardment followed by armored breakthrough. Soviet 51st and 57th Armies, totaling approximately 250,000 troops and 700 tanks, shatter Romanian defensive lines within the first day. German command recognizes the catastrophe unfolding. These are not limited Soviet attacks. These are converging pincer movements designed to encircle German 6th Army in Stalingrad. German units attempt desperate counterattacks, trying to slow Soviet advance sufficiently to permit orderly withdrawal from the city. They fail. Soviet tank columns advance faster than German infantry can retreat. At 1600 hours on the 23rd of November 1942, Soviet spearheads from the northern and southern offensives meet near the town of Kalak, APPROXIMTELY 60 kilometers west of Stalingrad. The encirclement is complete. German 6th Army, approximately 290,000 men, representing Germany's finest combat formations, is trapped inside what soldiers begin calling Der Kessel, the cauldron. The German High Command faces two options: order immediate breakout while units retain mobility and cohesion, or attempt to supply trapped forces by air while organizing relief operations. Hitler chooses the latter, influenced by Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring's assurance that the Luftwaffe can deliver 500 tons of supplies daily, the minimum required to sustain 6th Army. Göring's promise proves catastrophic fiction. The Luftwaffe never delivers more than 300 tons in a single day. Average daily deliveries reach only 105 tons, barely 20% of requirements. Soviet air forces improve rapidly, shooting down German transport aircraft at unsustainable rates. Between the 24th of November 1942 and the 31st of January 1943, the Luftwaffe loses 488 transport aircraft and 1,000 aircrew, irreplaceable losses that cripple German air transport capability for the remainder of the war. Inside the pocket, German forces begin dying, not from combat, but from starvation and cold. Winter descends on the Stalingrad pocket with merciless intensity. Temperatures plunge to minus 35 degrees Celsius to minus 40 degrees Celsius cold, sufficient to freeze exposed flesh in minutes, to render vehicle engines inoperable, to kill wounded soldiers in hours. German 6th Army, prepared for summer campaigning, lacks adequate winter clothing. Soldiers wrap newspapers under their uniforms for insulation. They burn furniture, books, and wooden crates for warmth fires that reveal positions to Soviet artillery observers. Frostbite casualties exceed combat casualties. A German surgeon writes, "We amputate frozen fingers and toes daily, sometimes 20 to 30 cases each morning. We lack anesthetic. Men bite leather straps while we saw through frozen bone. Starvation follows cold." With Luftwaffe supply flights delivering 1/5 of required food, German rations declined to 200 grams of bread daily by late December 1942, fewer than 700 calories per day for men engaged in combat operations requiring 3,000 to 4,000 calories. Soldiers eat horses. When horses are gone, they eat rats, oil leather boots, consume wallpaper paste. Malnutrition weakens immune systems. Typhus spreads through the pocket. Dysentery incapacitates thousands. German medical services collapse. The pocket contains approximately 20,000 wounded by mid-December, a number that grows daily. Field hospitals lack heating fuel, medicine, bandages, surgical equipment. Wounded soldiers freeze to death in unheated basements. Triage becomes selection for death. Only soldiers with minor wounds receive treatment. Seriously wounded are given morphine and left to die. A German medical officer records, "We have become selectors, not healers. We choose who lives through the night, knowing most will not see morning." Soviet forces tighten the encirclement, launching continuous attacks that compress the pocket's perimeter. German defensive lines contract from 100 kilometers on the 23rd of November to approximately 40 kilometers by January 1943. Each contraction requires abandoning equipment, wounded, and supply depots. German combat effectiveness deteriorates exponentially. Divisions nominally numbering 10,000 men shrink to 1,000 to 2,000 starving, frost-bitten survivors. Some units report 75% of remaining troops incapable of combat due to disease, injury, or malnutrition. On the 8th of January 1943, Soviet command delivers an ultimatum to General Paulus: surrender or face annihilation. The ultimatum offers honorable terms, food, medical treatment, eventual repatriation. Paulus, under direct orders from Hitler to fight to the death, refuses. The final Soviet assault begins the 10th of January 1943. Over 7,000 Soviet artillery pieces, the largest artillery concentration in history, to that date bombard German positions. The attack proceeds methodically, sector by sector, compressing the pocket towards Stalingrad city center. German resistance, though locally fierce, cannot alter the outcome. Units fight until ammunition exhausts and surrender or die. On the 30th of January 1943, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's assumption of power, the Führer promotes Paulus to Field Marshal, a calculated psychological operation. Hitler knows no German field marshal has ever surrendered. He expects Paulus to commit suicide rather than face capture. On the 31st of January 1943, Soviet troops capture Paulus alive in a basement command post. He surrenders without resistance, explaining to interrogators, "I have no intention of shooting myself for this Bohemian corporal." Over the following 2 days, German resistance collapses. Isolated groups fight on briefly, then surrender as ammunition depletes. On the 2nd of February 1943, the last German units cease fighting. The Battle of Stalingrad is over. The numbers document unprecedented destruction. German and Axis casualties, approximately 850,000 men. Of German Sixth Army's 290,000 troops trapped in the pocket, only 91,000 survived to surrender. Of those 91,000 prisoners, only 5,000 to 6,000 eventually returned to Germany in 1955, a survival rate of approximately 5.5%. Disease, malnutrition, and brutal captivity conditions kill the remainder. Soviet casualties: approximately 1.1 million military casualties, 478,741 killed or missing, 650,878 wounded. Civilian casualties in Stalingrad city: approximately 40,000 to 50,000 dead. Combined Axis and Soviet casualties exceed 2 million, making Stalingrad the deadliest battle in human history. Surpassing even Verdun in World War I, material losses match human casualties. Germany loses approximately 900 aircraft, 1,500 tanks, and 6,000 artillery pieces. The destruction of 6th Army, one of Wehrmacht's premier formations, removes approximately 20% of German Eastern Front combat power permanently. German offensive capability never recovers. But the true significance extends beyond numbers. Stalingrad represents the Wehrmacht's first major surrender in World War II, a psychological shock that reverberates throughout Germany and occupied Europe. German invincibility, the foundation of Nazi psychological warfare, collapses. Occupied populations recognize Germany can be defeated. Resistance movements intensify. Germany's allies Romania, Hungary, Italy begin seeking accommodation with the Allies. Strategically, Stalingrad forces complete German strategic reversal on the Eastern Front. Germany's 1942 summer offensive, designed to capture Caucasus oil fields and cripple Soviet industrial capacity, accomplishes neither objective. Instead, Germany loses its finest combat formations in an urban siege that delivers no strategic advantage. From February 1943 forward, Germany never again launches successful strategic offensive operations on the Eastern Front. Every subsequent German Operation Kursk aggression, the Vistula-Oder offensive, represents defensive reaction or failed counteroffensive. Soviet victory at Stalingrad establishes the Red Army's operational credibility. Operation Uranus demonstrates Soviet capacity for sophisticated strategic planning, operational secrecy, and combined arms execution at scales matching or exceeding German capabilities. The myth of German operational superiority dies in Stalingrad's ruins. The Battle of Stalingrad stands as World War II's definitive turning point, not because it makes German defeat inevitable, but because it makes German victory impossible. Before Stalingrad, Germany retained theoretical capacity to achieve favorable negotiated peace. The Wehrmacht, despite setbacks, maintained operational initiative on the Eastern Front. German armies threatened Soviet oil supplies, industrial regions, and transportation networks. Stalin, facing continued catastrophic losses, might have accepted territorial concessions to achieve armistice. After Stalingrad, such calculations become meaningless. Germany lacks military capacity to defeat the Soviet Union. Soviet industrial production relocated beyond Ural Mountains in 1941 outpaces German production in tanks, aircraft, and artillery by 1943. Soviet manpower reserves exceed German capacity to inflict casualties. Most critically, Soviet operational competence evolves. The Red Army that fought desperately in 1941 and 1942 becomes the Red Army that destroys Army Group Center in 1944 and captures Berlin in 1945. Battle also reveals the catastrophic consequences of ideologically driven military decision-making. Hitler's insistence on holding Stalingrad at any cost, his refusal to authorize tactical withdrawal when encirclement became inevitable, and his delusional faith in Gring's supply promises directly caused German Sixth Army's destruction. Professional military judgment, repeatedly offered by field commanders, is systematically ignored in favor of political symbolism. The pattern repeats throughout the war's remainder, ensuring Germany's defeat. For the Soviet Union, victory comes at nearly incomprehensible human cost. Over 1.1 million casualties, dead, wounded, and missing, represent losses exceeding the entire military casualties of the United States in World War II. 40,000 to 50,000 civilian deaths in Stalingrad alone exceed British civilian casualties for the entire war. Yet the Soviet population endures, absorbs losses that would collapse other nations, and continues fighting. This capacity for sustained sacrifice born from genuine patriotic resistance, ruthless political enforcement, and recognition that Nazi occupation offers only slavery or death determines the Eastern Front's outcome. The physical city of Stalingrad ceases to exist. Post-battle surveys estimate 99% of city buildings suffer damage or complete destruction. Reconstruction takes years. The city is renamed Volgograd in 1961 during de-Stalinization. But the battle's named Stalingrad achieves immortality. It enters global consciousness as synonym for industrial-scale destruction, for urban combat's ultimate horror, for determination meeting fanaticism in mutual annihilation. 80 years after the battle's conclusion, Stalingrad's lessons remain relevant. Modern military forces study its urban warfare tactics. Strategists analyze its operational encirclement. Political scientists examine its demonstration that ideological rigidity produces military catastrophe. Historians debate its exact position among World War II's decisive battles. But none dispute its fundamental significance. Stalingrad represents the moment Nazi Germany's conquest of Europe became impossible. In the frozen ruins beside the Volga River, among the skeletal remains of factories and apartment blocks, over 2 million casualties purchased a single strategic truth. Totalitarian aggression, no matter how initially successful, cannot overcome determined resistance, industrial capacity, and operational adaptation. This truth, written in blood and ice across Stalingrad's rubble, would be confirmed again in Berlin, May 1945, when Soviet soldiers raised the red banner over the Reichstag. If this deep examination of history's most consequential battle has provided new understanding of World War II's turning point, please consider supporting this channel by liking this video. Your engagement helps these detailed historical explorations reach viewers who value evidence-based analysis over simplified narratives. In the comments below, tell us where you're watching from and which aspect of the Stalingrad battle you found most compelling: the urban warfare tactics, the strategic miscalculations, the human cost, or the broader implications for World War II's outcome. For those interested in further exploration, recommended sources include Antony Beevor's Stalingrad, The Fateful Siege, David Glantz's Operational Analyses, and Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate, a novel by a Soviet war correspondent who witnessed the battle firsthand. Thank you for dedicating 30 minutes to understanding this pivotal moment in human history. History's lessons remain relevant only when we commit to learning them deeply, honestly, and completely. Until the next exploration, this has been your guide through the turning point that changed the world.